No one stopped. Not when her car died under the burning sun, not when her phone went dark, not when fear crept into her eyes in the middle of a crowded street. Everyone walked past her. Everyone except one poor black man the world had trained to ignore. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her power. He only knew she needed help. Hours later, that same man stood in a courtroom, accused of a crime he didn't commit, and the woman he helped now sat above him, wearing the judge's robe. What happened next exposed a truth no system was ready to face. The sun burned straight overhead, merciless and bright, the kind of light that exposes everything and forgives nothing. Heat shimmered off the asphalt, horns blared, people hurried past, eyes forward, shoulders tight, and in the middle of all that noise and movement, a young woman stood completely still, as if the world had decided to move on without her. She was beautiful in a quiet, unprotected way, not dressed for attention, not dressed for trouble. Her white blouse clung slightly from the heat. Her hair was pulled back, neat but imperfect now, loose strands sticking to her forehead. Her car sat dead behind her, hood popped open like a silent cry for help. Her phone was dark in her hand. No signal, no battery, no way out. Cars slowed just long enough for drivers to look, to judge, to decide it wasn't their problem. Then they sped away. Pedestrians passed her in waves. A man in a suit glanced once and looked away faster. A group of coworkers laughed about something else entirely as they walked by. A woman clutched her purse tighter and crossed the street. Someone shook their head like this was an inconvenience. She'd brought on herself. The sun kept beating down. Her hands began to shake, not dramatically, not enough for anyone to notice unless they were really looking. Her breathing shortened. She swallowed hard, standing there in full daylight, surrounded by people, and still completely alone. Then he saw her. He wasn't supposed to matter. Men like him never did. He wore a faded shirt that had lost its color years ago. The collar was frayed. His jeans were clean but worn thin at the knees. His shoes had scuffs that told stories of long walks and longer days. His face held lines that didn't come from age alone, but from years of being overlooked, dismissed, stepped past. He was a poor black man in a city that taught men like him one lesson early and repeated it often. Don't be seen. Don't T involved. Don't draw attention. Keep your head down and keep moving. And for most of his life, he had done exactly that. He had learned how to become invisible in plain sight, how to shrink his presence so others could feel comfortable, how to step aside, lower his eyes, soften his voice. He had learned that helping the wrong person at the wrong time could cost you everything. He had learned good intentions were often repaid with suspicion. Still, when he saw her standing there, something inside him slowed. He noticed the way she kept glancing at her phone even though it was useless, the way her shoulders were tense, her posture trying to stay strong while fear crept in quietly. He noticed how people looked at her and then looked away, relief flashing across their faces that I weren't the one stranded. He stopped walking. That alone felt dangerous. Someone behind him scoffed. She'll be fine, a man muttered as he passed. Another voice, lower, sharper, said, mind your business. Laughter followed, quick, dismissive, the kind that reminds you of your place. He hesitated just long enough to feel the weight of all those warnings pressed down on him. Every memory told him to keep going, to let someone else help, to let the world handle its own problems. But the woman's eyes met his for just a second. Not with expectation, not with entitlement, with something else. Fear mixed with embarrassment, a quiet plea she hadn't spoken out loud. And that was enough. He took a step toward her, then another. She flinched slightly at first, instinctively, like the whirl. Dee had taught her to be careful too. He noticed, and stopped a few feet away, raising his hands just enough to show he meant no harm. Ma'am, he said gently. His voice was calm, low, steady. You okay? The question broke something open. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. My car just stopped, she said, gesturing helplessly. My phone died. I don't know anyone nearby. He nodded slowly, listening. Really listening. Not interrupting. Not rushing her. The sun pressed down on them both now, equal and heavy. You thirsty? He asked. She hesitated, then nodded. He reached into his worn backpack and pulled out a half-full bottle of water. He held it out like an offering, not assuming, not pushing. She took it with both hands, murmured a thank you, and drank as if her body had been waiting for permission to breathe again. People watched from a distance, curious now, suspicious. A few slowed their steps. Some shook airheads. The story was already writing itself in their minds, and it wasn't a kind one. He didn't seem to notice. "Let's get you out of the sun," he said, pointing to the narrow strip of shade cast by a nearby building. He walked to her car, leaned his weight into it and pushed. Muscles strained, sweat bloomed across his back. The tires resisted, then finally rolled. She rushed to help Apollo, guising over and over. "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to. This is such a burden." He shook his head, still pushing. "Ain't no burden," he said between breaths. "Everyone needs help sometimes." Those words landed differently than she expected. They weren't dramatic, they weren't rehearsed. They were spoken like a truth he'd lived with, like something he'd learned the hard way, when the car was safe. In the shade, he stepped back, wiping his brow with his sleeve. His hands trembled now, not from fear but from effort. The sun had soaked through his shirt. His chest rose and fell slowly as he caught his breath. She looked at him then, really looked, not like the others had, not through him, not around him, at him. She noticed the kindness in his eyes, the patience, the way he had kept a respectful distance, the way he hadn't asked her name, or where she was going, or why she was alone. He had helped without conditions, without expectation. "Thank you," she said again, softer this time. "Most people just walk past." He gave a small shrug. "They busy," he said. "Life make folks busy." A silence settled between them, not awkward, just quiet. The street noise filled in the gaps. Somewhere nearby, a siren wailed and faded. The day went on. She asked if there was anything she could do to repay him. He shook his head immediately. "Just make it home safe," he said. "That's enough." She smiled then. A real smile. One that reached her eyes. One that said she would remember this moment, even if the world moved on. He turned to leave, backpack slung over his shoulder again, disappearing back into the crowd that had ignored her minutes earlier. No one stopped him. No one thanked him. No one noticed. Except her. She watched him go until he blended into the city, just another and walking under the sun. What neither of them knew was how close this moment hovered to something much bigger. How fragile the line between helper and accused could be. How the same city street that witnessed kindness in daylight would soon echo with judgment under fluorescent lights. In just a few hours, she would sit high above a room filled with whispers and rules and power. She would wear a robe instead of a blouse. Authority instead of vulnerability. People would stand when she entered. Voices would fall silent at her command. And the man who had helped her without asking her name would stand below her, hands folded, eyes lowered, accused of something he hadn't done. For now, though, there was only the sun, the street, and a kindness given freely, with no idea of the cost it might soon demand. The day wasn't finished yet. The room was silent when they brought him in. Not the kind of silence that feels peaceful, but the kind that presses against your chest and makes it hard to breathe. Sunlight poured through the tall courtroom windows, bright and honest, cutting clean lines across the polished floor. From the outside, the building looked open, fair, almost welcoming. Inside, the air felt colder than winter. He stood at the defense table alone. No expensive suit wrapped around his shoulders. No lawyer leaning in close to whisper strategy. No family seated behind him for support. Just his worn jacket, his folded hands, and eyes that carried years of being tired before the day even began. They said he stole something small, something easy to accuse. A charge light enough to sound harmless, but heavy enough to follow a man like him for the rest of his life. The kind of accusation that didn't shock anyone in the room, the kind that fit too neatly. Whispers moved like a low hum behind him, soft, constant. People leaned toward each other, lips barely moving, eyes never leaving his back. He didn't hear the words clearly, but he knew them anyway. He had heard them his whole life. Assumptions dressed up as facts. Judgment pretending to be reason. The prosecutor stood tall, confident, voice sharp and practiced. Every word landed with certainty, like the truth had already been decided. The police report was read aloud, clean and fast. Timelines, descriptions, conclusions. No one slowed down long enough to question them. No one mentioned that. There were no clear witnesses. No one mentioned that the security footage was blurry. No one mentioned how quickly he'd been handcuffed. It all moved so fast. He listened, heart pounding, trying to follow every word, trying to understand how a few moments of his life had turned into this. How one wrong place at the wrong time could erase everything else about him. When they finally let him speak, it felt like a test he was already failing. He cleared his throat. His mouth was dry. His voice came out shaky despite his effort to steady it. He explained where he had been, what he had been doing, how he never touched what they said he stole, how he didn't even know the man who accused him. He spoke honestly, carefully, like his life depended on each sentence. It didn't seem to matter. "Answer the question," someone snapped when he tried to explain further. "Stick to the facts," the prosecutor said, eyes narrowing. "Don't waste the court's time," came another voice, impatient and cold. Each interruption chipped away at him. Each sharp tone made his shoulders sink a little lower. He felt small standing there, exposed under the bright lights, his every word measured and doubted. He wasn't angry, not yet. Mostly he was tired. Tired of proving himself. Tired of explaining that he wasn't what people assumed. Tired of feeling like the truth. Had to fight harder when it came from his mouth. Then, without meaning to, he looked up, and everything inside him stopped. The judge sat high above the room, framed by wood and light, calm and still. Her face was composed, professional, unreadable. But he knew that face, knew those eyes. It was her. The woman from the street. The one who had stood stranded under the sun just hours earlier. The one whose hands had trembled when her phone went dark. The one who had taken his water, accepted his help, and looked at him like he mattered. Now she wore a robe instead of a blouse. Authority instead of fear, power instead of uncertainty. She looked nothing like the woman he had helped, and yet she looked exactly the same. His breath caught. His chest tightened. For a moment the courtroom faded, replaced by the memory of heat and asphalt and kindness given without thought. Then reality crashed back in. She didn't react. No flicker of recognition crossed her face. No pause. No change in posture. She sat perfectly still, eyes focused forward, hands resting calmly. Shame burned through him. Of course she wouldn't remember, he told himself. Why would she? To her, that moment on, the street had probably been small, forgettable, just another stranger passing through her life. To him, it had been something else. A reminder that doing the right thing still mattered, that kindness still existed. Now it felt foolish. He lowered his gaze, staring at the worn surface of the table in front of him. He felt exposed, like he had misunderstood the world again, like he had mistaken. A moment of connection for something real. Around him, the system moved on without hesitation. Questions were asked, answers were demanded, notes were taken. Time marched forward with no concern for his racing thoughts. Outside, people believed justice was blind. They believed this room was fair. That truth mattered more than appearances. Inside, the machine worked exactly as it always had. Fast, efficient, unforgiving. The prosecutor continued, voice steady, painting a picture that felt nothing like his life but sounded convincing enough. Each sentence placed him deeper into a story he didn't recognize. He wanted to interrupt, to shout, to say they were wrong. But every instinct told him that raising his voice would only make things worse. So he stood there quietly, dignity clutch, head tightly in his chest, even as it slipped from his grasp. The judge listened without expression. She took notes. She nodded occasionally. From where he stood, she looked distant, untouchable. He wondered if she remembered the way she had thanked him on the street, if she remembered the relief in her own voice when someone finally stopped, or if that version of her was gone now, replaced by the one who held his fate. Minutes stretched. The room felt smaller. The sunlight no longer felt warm. It felt like a spotlight. When the prosecutor finished, a hush fell again. Everyone waited for the next step, the next blow. The judge looked down at the papers in front of her. Then she looked up. Her eyes moved, slowly, deliberately, until they landed on him. He felt the weight of that gaze settle over him, heavy and sharp. His heart thudded in his ears. This was it, he thought. This was the moment where everything tipped against him. He braced himself. Then she spoke. Not loudly, not sharply. Just one quiet question, measured and calm, cutting through the noise like a blade. And in that moment, the entire room leaned forward, unaware that the story they thought they were watching was about to change. The judge leaned forward again, and this time no one mistook the movement for routine. It wasn't authority that filled the room in that moment. It was memory. Her hands rested on the edge of the bench, fingers still, but her eyes had changed. They were no longer distant, they were searching. "Before we continue," she said, and though her voice remained calm, something inside it had shifted. Something human had broken through the practiced control. "I have a question for the defendant." The courtroom froze. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. The hum of whispers died instantly, as if an unseen hand had reached out and silenced them. The prosecutor stiffened. The clerk looked up sharply. Every head in the room turned toward the judge, then slowly toward the man standing alone at the defense table. He felt his pulse in his throat. Questions in this room had never helped him before. They were usually traps dressed as fairness. Still, something about the way she spoke made him lift his head, slowly, carefully, like someone stepping onto thin ice. She didn't look at the papers in front of her. She didn't consult the law books stacked neatly beside her. She looked straight at him. "This morning," she began, "I was on my way to this courthouse." Her words were simple, almost casual, but they cut through the room with a strange weight. No one interrupted. No one dared. She continued, her voice steady, measured, carrying clearly to the last row. "Oh, benches. My car broke down on a busy street. It was midday. The sun was high, the heat was relentless." As she spoke, the courtroom faded into something else entirely. Asphalt shimmering under light, exhaust hanging in the air, the quiet panic of being stranded while the world rushes past. "I stood there for a long time," she said. "Long enough to notice how many people saw me." A pause. "And how many chose to keep walking?" The man's chest tightened. He knew this story. He had lived it. Not from her side, but from his. She described the way cars slowed just enough for drivers to look, then sped away. The way pedestrians glanced once, then avoided eye contact. The way help felt close enough to touch, yet impossibly far. Her words were not dramatic. That was what made them powerful. Oh, they were honest, unadorned, spoken the way truth often is when it doesn't need to perform. "I watched dozens of people decide," she continued, "that my situation was not their concern." The room shifted. Some people looked down, others leaned back uncomfortably. It was hard not to recognize yourself in her words. Then, she said, one man stopped. The man at the defense table felt sumped. Hing stir in his chest. Something like recognition mixed with disbelief. His hands tightened together. "He didn't ask who I was," the judge said. "He didn't hesitate. He didn't look around to see if anyone else would step in first. He offered me water. He moved my car out of the sun. He spoke to me with kindness and respect." Her eyes locked onto his. "He helped me without knowing my name, without knowing my position, without expecting anything in return." The defendant lifted his head fully now, confusion spreading across his face, his breath shallow. His mind raced back to the street, to the heat, to the woman with the dead phone, to the way she had smiled at him when he finished pushing her car. He had wondered if she would remember. He had assumed she wouldn't. "That man, the Judge said quietly, the room so silent her words seemed to echo. "Was you." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the courtroom erupted in sound, gasps, sharp and involuntary. Whispers burst free, rippling across the benches like a wave. A man in the gallery shook his head in disbelief. Someone else leaned forward, eyes wide. The prosecutor's face went pale, his mouth opening slightly before he out himself. The defendant stood frozen, heart pounding so hard it hurt. He stared at the judge, searching her face for any sign that this was a mistake, a misunderstanding, a cruel coincidence. But her expression didn't waver. "I recognized him the moment he looked up," she continued, her voice still calm, still controlled. "I chose to wait." She explained how she had been stranded earlier. hat same day, on her way to preside over this very courtroom. How she had stood under the sun feeling exposed and powerless despite the title she carried. How she had watched people pass her by without a second thought. "How strange it is," she said softly, "how quickly dignity can disappear when you need help." She told them how only one person stopped, how that person was the same man now ending accused, how he had treated her like a human being when the world had chosen convenience instead. The room felt heavy now, thick with realization. She paused then, truly paused. Let the truth settle into the cracks of the room. Let it press against every assumption that had been made without question. The defendant swallowed hard. His eyes burned, though he refused to let tears fall. Had learned long ago that emotion was often used against men like him. The judge straightened slightly. "Now," she said, "I would like to review the evidence again." The prosecutor cleared his throat. "Your Honor," again, she repeated, gently but firmly, slowly. There was no anger in her voice, no accusation, just resolve. She began to ask questions. Not rushed ones, not surface-level one. Questions that demanded precision. She revisited the timeline step by step, asking why certain moments had been glossed over. She questioned the speed of the arrest, the lack of corroboration, the reliance on assumption instead of fact. Each question peeled back another layer of certainty. The police officer on the stand hesitated when pressed about details he had previously delivered with confidence. His answers grew vague. His eyes darted toward the prosecutor, then back to the judge. The security footage was discussed again. This time, frame by frame, the blur that had once been described as clear enough suddenly looked very different under careful scrutiny. Witnesses contradicted themselves. Times didn't align. Distances didn't make sense. The story began to unravel. What had once seemed obvious now looked fragile. What had been accepted without challenge now bent under the weight of examination. The prosecutor's confidence faded visibly. His posture stiffened, then sagged. He shuffled his purrs more often than necessary. His voice lost its edge, his sentences ending without the certainty they once carried. For the first time, the power in the room shifted. The man at the defense table felt it before he fully understood it. The pressure that had been crushing his chest loosened, just slightly. He straightened his back, not out of pride, but out of relief. He wasn't being talked over anymore. He wasn't being dismissed. He was being heard. When he spoke now, his voice was steadier, not louder, not defiant, just clear. He answered questions fully, without rushing. He allowed silences to exist, trusting that the truth didn't need to be forced. The judge listened closely, her eyes never leaving him. Something deep inside her ached. She thought about how easily this case could have ended differently. How many times she had trusted the process without questioning the patterns beneath it. How many people had stood where he stood now, never given the benefit of a second look. If she had not met him as a stranger first, stripped of power and position, she might never have questioned the narrative placed before her. She might never have seen him as human. The realization sat heavy in her chest. She continued her examination, dismantling the case piece by piece. Each question exposed another crack. Each answer revealed how thin the accusation truly was. By the time she leaned back again, the courtroom no longer buzzed with certainty. It pulsed with tension. The defendant stood there, caught between past injustice and the possibility of redemption, unsure of what the next moment would bring. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He simply waited. And everyone in that room knew something had changed. The story they thought they were watching was no longer the same. The truth had a face now, and it was one she couldn't forget. The verdict came without drama, without hesitation, without delay. Not guilty. 2 words, simple, final, heavy with meaning. The gavel came down softly, almost gently, but the sound carried through the courtroom like thunder rolling across open land. It echoed off the wooden walls, off the polished floor, off the ribs of every person sitting in that room. For a brief moment, no one moved, no one spoke. Even the sunlight streaming through the tall windows seemed to pause, as if the day itself needed a second to understand what had just happened. The man at the defense table didn't react right away. He stood still, hands resting on the edge of the table, shoulders tense, as if his body hadn't yet received the message his ears had heard. Then, slowly, his chest rose and fell in a long, silent breath. It felt like years of weight leaving him all at once. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet release, the kind that comes after holding yourself together for far too long. He didn't smile, he didn't cry. He simply closed his eyes for a second, letting the truth settle into his bones. Free. The judge looked out over the courtroom, and for the first time that day, her expression soft. Ned completely. She wasn't looking at statutes or procedures anymore. She was looking at people. Real people. People who had watched a system almost fail in real time. She spoke again, not as someone delivering a ruling, but as someone sharing a realization. She talked about dignity, about how it doesn't announce itself, how it doesn't demand attention or applause, how it shows up quietly, often, in places where no one is watching. She spoke about character, about how it reveals itself not when power is present, but when it is absent, when no reward is promised, when no title is known. Her voice carried through the room, steady and sincere. She didn't lecture, she reflected, she admitted, without naming herself directly, how easy it is to trust systems without questioning patterns. How easy it is to mistake speed for justice. How dangerous it is to confuse familiarity with truth. She spoke about the moment on the street, about standing under the sun with no authority, no robe, no protection, about how quickly the world can strip a person down to their most human state, and about how one act of kindness had cut through that moment like light through shadow. She looked at the Ma. Then, really looked at him, not as a defendant, not as a case number, but as the person who had stopped when everyone else had kept walking. Her eyes held gratitude, respect, something deeper than either. He met her gaze briefly, then nodded once. Not in thanks, not in pride, just acknowledgement. Two human beings recognizing something real between them. The courtroom slowly came back to life. Chairs shifted. People whispered again, but the tone had changed. There was no excitement, no gossip-driven energy, just a quiet awareness that something important had taken place, something that couldn't be undone or unseen. As the room emptied, the man gathered his few belongings. He didn't rush, he didn't linger. Each step felt measured, careful, like he was relearning how to move without fear pressing down on him. When he stepped outside, the daylight hit him immediately, bright, warm, familiar. The same sun that had beaten down on him earlier that day now felt different, kinder somehow. He stood on the courthouse steps and breathed in the air, deeper than he had in hours, maybe days. Traffic moved as it always did. People passed by, wrapped up in their own lives. The world didn't stop for his moment of freedom, and that was okay. He didn't raise his arms. He didn't shout. He didn't call anyone. He simply stood there for a second, feeling the ground beneath his feet, feeling the weight of accusation finally gone. Then he walked, across the street, down the sidewalk, back into a life that had almost been taken from him. Behind him, the judge stood on the courthouse, used steps, watching him go. She didn't call out. She didn't wave. She just observed, understanding now how close the system she served had come to swallowing an innocent man whole. Not because of hatred, not because of cruelty, but because of indifference, because of unchecked assumptions, because of stories accepted, without challenge, because of a world that often moves too fast to stop for those who need it most. The story spread quickly, not as gossip, not a scandal, but as a reminder. People talked about the judge who recognized a man she had met as a stranger, about the defendant who turned out to be the only one who helped when help was needed, about a courtroom that nearly followed its usual path before being forced to look again. It traveled from conversations at dinner to quiet moments in cars, from social media posts to hushed reflections among those who worked within the system itself. Some dismissed it as coincidence. Others felt something deeper stir inside them. They thought about the times they had walked past someone in need, about the moments they had chosen convenience over compassion, about how easily dignity can be overlooked when a person doesn't look powerful. The man returned to his life quietly. He went back to work, back to long days and tired nights, back to being mostly unseen. But something had changed in him too. Not pride, not bitterness, certainty. Certainty that doing the right thing mattered, even when it seemed invisible. Certainty that kindness was not wasted, even when it felt unreturned. Certainty that dignity, once given, has a way of finding its way back. The judge returned to her bench with a heavier awareness and a lighter heart. She questioned more. She slowed down. She listened harder. Not because she had lost faith in the law, but because she had learned how easily it could forget the people it was meant to protect. And the world kept turning. But somewhere beneath the noise, a truth echoed quietly, steady and unshakable, that the measure of a person is not their title or their wealth, that help given in silence can reach places power never could, and that sometimes the smallest act of kindness becomes the loudest voice in the room, because dignity, once recognized, doesn't just change a verdict, it changes everything.